Hello everyone and welcome to my channel AUDRA'S. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Victoria Newman had weathered betrayals, power struggles, corporate coups, and the kind of heartbreak only Genoa City could manufacture, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the moment when the results of a quiet, unpublicized DNA test arrived on her phone with a vibration so faint and innocent that it mocked the hurricane brewing behind her eyes. Because as she opened that digital document and saw AUDRA'S name aligned with her own under the unmistakable heading biological parent match, her breath vanished, her heartbeat stalled, and the world reoriented itself with brutal force, throwing her decades of memories into question as the truth took shape. Audra was her real child. The baby she had been told died at birth, the baby whose existence the Newman machine had buried so deeply that even she, who had sworn she would never forget her own flesh and blood, had surrendered to the lie. And now, as she stared at the report, she felt the shock radiate through her bones, a feral mix of grief, rage, disbelief, and an almost painful surge of maternal recognition, because suddenly the ways Audra had always seemed just a little too sharp, too intuitive, too driven, traits Victoria recognized in the mirror every morning, made perfect sense, and her mind replayed every interaction, every strategic clash, every icy stare between them with new understanding, as though her subconscious had been trying to tell her the truth all along but had never been allowed to break through the noise of Claire Grace's carefully engineered facade. Claire who had been welcomed as family, Claire who had been believed to be the stolen baby Victoria mourned, Claire who had wielded her victimhood like a crown that shielded her from scrutiny while she burrowed deeper into the Newman world until she stood in positions of emotional power no outsider should have held. And now with this DNA shocker, the story she told, the life she claimed, crumbled like dust in the wind, and Victoria, trembling as she paced across her office at Newman Enterprises, realized with chilling clarity that Claire's reign, the emotional influence she had gained over the family, over Harrison, over the narrative of being the lost daughter, was about to end with catastrophic swiftness because the real daughter, the daughter stolen from her as an infant, was not the woman who had cried in her arms, confessed her guilt, and sworn she wanted redemption. It was Audra, the ambitious executive who had fought Victoria, challenged her, tempted Nate, played with power like oxygen, and yet beneath her ruthlessness possessed a vulnerability Victoria had dismissed for years. And now she wondered how much of that hardness had been shaped by the life she should never have lived, the life stripped from her before her first breath was even taken outside the hospital, a life Victoria would have fiercely protected if only she had known. But someone with motive, someone with means, had ensured she never would, and as the reality blanketed her, the question of who orchestrated this deception screamed in her mind. Was it Victor? Was it Nikki? Was it Cole? Was it some shadow from her past with a vendetta? Or was it a conspiracy born out of the tangled complexities of Newman alliances and rivalries, the kind of machination only their dynasty could produce? The need for answers turned her shock into molten fury, and she stormed out, marching down the hallway, each step charged with purpose, until she found herself outside the door to the Newman conference room where Victor stood with Nick, Adam and Nate, discussing the next corporate expansion, oblivious to the emotional bomb about to detonate. And when she pushed open the door, her voice slicing through the room with a trembling authority, "We need to talk. All of you." The men exchanged looks, sensing the storm in her eyes, and Victor, ever the patriarch, took a step forward, his brow creasing as he asked what was wrong. But Victoria didn't hand him a neat explanation. She didn't soften her tone or ease into the subject. She handed him the phone, the DNA report glowing like a confession, and as Victor read it, his face shifted through recognition, horror, calculation, and something far more rare. Guilt, deep and unmistakable guilt that made Victoria's stomach drop because he knew something, maybe not everything, but enough to understand the gravity of what she had discovered. And when he whispered, "My God, Audra," she felt her knees weaken while rage surged anew, because his reaction confirmed her worst suspicion, that somewhere in the empire of secrets Victor Newman maintained, the truth of her daughter had been known, or at least suspected, and yet she had been left to believe her child was dead, left to bond with the wrong woman, left to mourn a lie while her real daughter grew up under circumstances neither of them should have endured. And when Nick asked what this meant for Claire, the air in the room snapped with tension because Victoria finally said it out loud, the words scorching her throat. "Claire isn't my daughter. She never was." The real daughter, the daughter I lost, is Audra Charles. The silence that followed felt apocalyptic, shattering whatever illusions remained that their family could survive yet another betrayal without seismic fallout, and Adam, ever the first to process explosive truth, murmured a stunned, "Holy hell," while Nate's eyes widened with the personal implications, his entire complicated history with Audra now rewritten through the lens of bloodlines and destiny. But Victoria wasn't thinking about corporate dynamics or romantic entanglements, she was thinking about Claire, the woman who had manipulated their sympathy, who had leaned into the trauma inflicted by Jordan and twisted it into a narrative that allowed her to infiltrate every vulnerable crack in the Newman family. And the betrayal that punched Victoria in the chest felt almost nauseating, because she had embraced Claire, defended her, given her a second chance, tested the edges of forgiveness, never realizing that the girl she thought was her daughter was playing a role written by someone else, a script built on lies, and now that truth was fractured beyond repair. And when she left the room, her pulse roaring, she could hear Victor calling after her, but she kept walking, driven by an instinct older and stronger than corporate duty, the instinct of a mother seeking her stolen child. And when she burst into society where she knew Audra was meeting with a potential investor, she saw the woman lift her gaze with a mixture of irritation and caution, the look she always used with Victoria, one forged through rivalry, not family. But this time Victoria saw something different, something raw beneath Audra's perfectly controlled exterior, a flicker she never noticed until now. And when she approached her, breathless, eyes wet and voice unsteady, Audra stiffened, expecting a professional ambush, but instead Victoria whispered, barely audible, You're my daughter." And the world seemed to freeze between them as Audra blinked, confusion erupting across her face, followed by disbelief, skepticism, then a trembling fear she could not mask, because she had lived her entire life without roots, without permanency, without the unconditional security Victoria had always offered her other children, and the idea that she belonged to someone, to Victoria Newman, rocked her to the core. And when Victoria handed her the DNA results, Audra's hand trembled as she read them, her breath hitching when she reached the confirmation, and her usually impenetrable composure cracked open, revealing the young girl inside her who had longed for belonging, for identity, for truth. And in that moment, as tears welled in Audra's eyes and she whispered, "I don't understand. How? Why?" Victoria felt her heart break all over again because she didn't have answers yet, only the certainty that they had been robbed of decades they could never reclaim, stolen by someone with motives she intended to uncover with relentless fury. But before she could begin comforting her newly rediscovered daughter, a voice sliced through the tension, shaky, desperate, wounded, "Victoria." And there stood Claire, pale as a ghost, having overheard enough to understand everything was slipping out of her grasp, the life she had built, the identity she clung to, the love she thought she had earned. And the moment her eyes met Victoria's, the truth reflected back, a truth Claire had always feared. She wasn't the one Victoria was meant to love, she wasn't the stolen child, she wasn't the piece of Victoria's heart she believed she could reclaim. And her voice cracked as she stepped forward, insisting that the tests were wrong, that someone was trying to tear them apart, that she was the daughter who had suffered, who had survived Jordan's horrors, who had fought to find redemption. But Victoria, though aching, stood firm because the results were undeniable, and Claire's insistence only made the betrayal sting deeper, until finally Victoria whispered with devastating finality, "Claire, your story is tragic. What you endured was real. But you're not my daughter. And you knew, didn't you?" The silence was suffocating as Claire's face twisted with guilt she could no longer hide, and Audra's eyes widened with horror as she realized the truth. Claire had known the tests were fabricated, that she had built her identity on a lie, and as Victoria's heartbreak turned into unstoppable resolve, she declared, voice icy and fierce, "Your reign is over, Claire. The truth is here. And I'm taking back what was stolen from me." And as Claire collapsed into a trembling mess, Audra stood beside Victoria, unsure, overwhelmed, afraid. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone, and Victoria reached out, taking her hand, sealing a bond that had been broken for decades but was now finally beginning to heal. The moment Victoria's hand closed around Audra's, a shift rippled through the room, so subtle at first, yet powerful enough to alter the gravity binding all three women together, because as Audra tried to steady her breath and Claire struggled to swallow the crushing blow of her unraveling identity, Victoria felt a pull between past and present, the weight of decades lost, the ache of a mother's rediscovered purpose, and the burn of betrayal that threatened to consume her. But even in the chaos, she could not let go of Audra, not now, not after learning the truth that had been buried under years of manipulation, lies, forged documents, and emotional warfare. And as the silence thickened, every patron inside society sensed that something seismic was unfolding, the kind of Newman family implosion that could reshape alliances and ignite new wars. But none dared move, none dared speak, none dared breathe too loudly for fear of shattering the moment. And Claire, trembling, took a step forward, her voice small, splintered, desperate, begging for acknowledgement, craving the identity that had been her lifeline since the moment she escaped Jordan's cruelty. And with a broken whisper she said, "Victoria, please. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I thought if I believed hard enough, if I held on tight enough, the lie would become true." And for a fleeting second Victoria felt the old wound of empathy tug at her, because Claire's pain was real, her trauma devastating, her longing for family genuine. But the truth was stronger, fiercer, unyielding, and it carved a line between them that could never again be blurred. Yet it wasn't cruelty that kept Victoria's hand in Audra's, it was instinct, a force so ancient and primal it shook her from the inside. And when she looked at Audra, she saw a reflection of herself, not in appearance but in energy. The sharpness, the guarded vulnerability, the hunger for respect, the loneliness masked by ambition, all of it painting the portrait of the daughter she had been denied. And the realization made her chest tighten until she could barely inhale. And Audra, usually a fortress of composure, felt her defenses cracking with each passing breath, tears threatening to spill as she whispered, "All my life, I thought I didn't belong anywhere. I thought I had to fight for every scrap of power just to matter. And now you're telling me I wasn't unwanted. I wasn't abandoned. I was stolen." The tremor in her voice shattered Claire's remaining control, and she let out a quiet sob, clinging to the last shreds of the only identity she had ever known, insisting that she never meant to hurt anyone, that she was a victim too, that her lies were rooted in fear and conditioning. But Victoria, though not unkind, could not rewrite reality to comfort Claire. And in a voice steady but thick with grief she said, "Claire, you were wronged. You were hurt. But you cannot claim a life that was never yours. Not when the truth is staring us in the face. Not when my daughter has been out there suffering in ways neither of us knew." And as Claire crumbled, Audra looked at Victoria with an expression torn between cautious hope and crippling fear, because accepting this truth meant tearing down the very identity she had built to survive, and she didn't know if she had the strength to do it. But Victoria squeezed her hand gently, grounding her, telling her without words that she wasn't alone anymore. And the gesture nearly broke Audra because it felt foreign, comfort, safety, belonging, things she had never associated with the mother she now realized she had unknowingly battled for years. And just as Victoria prepared to guide Audra somewhere private, somewhere safe, somewhere far away from the public eyes devouring the drama, Nate and Nick burst through the doors of society, breathless, panicked, having been alerted by murmurs spreading across Genoa City that something explosive was happening. And when they saw the scene, Claire collapsed, Audra shaking, Victoria holding her newly rediscovered daughter's hand. They froze, struggling to process the magnitude of what they were witnessing. And Nate, whose history with Audra had been intense, complicated, and often combustible, found himself struck speechless as the realization settled in. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had betrayed, the woman who had nearly destroyed him, was Victoria's child, a Newman by blood, by destiny, by the kind of fate that rewrote everything he thought he knew. And Nick, protective as ever, moved toward Victoria, wrapping a supportive arm around her shoulder as he murmured, "You okay?" But Victoria could not form the answer because her emotions were too vast, too tangled, too overwhelming to compress into words. Yet even without an answer, Nick sensed the truth. His sister was barely holding herself together, teetering between devastation and determination. And so he shifted his gaze to Claire, anger flashing like lightning, demanding, "How long did you know? How long were you going to let her believe you were her daughter?" And Claire, choking on sobs, insisted she didn't know at first, that Jordan had manipulated her, filled her head with lies, coached her to fill a role, and that when the truth began to surface she panicked, afraid of losing the family she had come to love. But Nick, no longer softened by sympathy, muttered, "You should have told the truth," and the indictment made Claire flinch as though struck, sending her into another spiral of guilt. Meanwhile Audra, still in shock, whispered to Victoria, "Why now? Why after all these years? Who took me? Who lied to you? How did they keep this hidden? And the questions, heavy as bricks, landed on Victoria's shoulders with a crushing thud, because she didn't have the answers, not yet, but she intended to destroy whoever was responsible, even if it meant going to war with her own family, and the fire in her eyes made Nick step back, recognizing the deadly resolve that only emerged when a Newman had been wronged in the deepest possible way, and before anyone could further escalate the already volatile situation. The doors of society opened once more, and Victor entered, cane in hand, posture rigid, expression unreadable, carrying with him the unmistakable aura of a man who had shaped empires, crushed enemies, and hidden truths so potent they could topple kingdoms. And when he approached the group, the crowd parted instinctively, sensing the magnitude of what was about to unfold, and Victoria stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm as she demanded, "Tell me the truth, Dad. Did you know? Did you know my daughter was alive?" And Victor, for once, did not offer reassurance, did not give a polished explanation, did not wear the mask of impenetrable confidence he had perfected over decades. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as though the weight of years of secrets pressed upon him, and said, "I suspected. But suspicion is not proof, Victoria." And though his voice was measured, his daughter heard the cracks beneath it, the guilt, the fear, the regret, and it ignited her fury all over again, because suspicion should have been enough for him to investigate, to uncover the truth, to tell her, to trust her. But he had not, and that failure carved a wound that would not heal easily, and Audra's expression hardened as she realized what this meant, that her life, her identity, her trauma, her abandonment, may have been collateral damage in a Newman-caliber conspiracy, and the thought made her stomach twist with rage and grief intertwined. But before Victor could continue, Claire, desperate to salvage something, anything, cried out, "Don't blame me. I didn't take her. I didn't steal anything." And her voice, raw with pain, echoed through the restaurant as she added, "I just wanted to belong somewhere. I just wanted a family." And though her outburst earned sympathetic glances from the onlookers, it could not erase the magnitude of what she had done or the role she had played in helping Jordan manipulate the Newmans. And as the emotional storm reached a breaking point, Victoria straightened her spine, tightened her grip on Audra's hand, and declared with a steel-edged calm that chilled everyone in earshot, "This ends now. No more lies. No more stolen identities. No more manipulation. From this moment on, I will do whatever it takes to uncover the truth, every detail, every name, every motive, and I swear to you, Audra, no one will ever take you from me again." And the vow hit Audra with such force that she couldn't hold back her tears any longer, collapsing into Victoria's arms as years of suppressed longing erupted from her chest. And for the first time in her life, she felt safe, understood, wanted, not for her ambition, not for her strategic mind, not for the power she could offer someone, but for simply existing. And as Victoria held her daughter, Claire watched, shattered, realizing that the family she had dreamed of would never truly be hers again. And with a strangled sob, she fled the restaurant, leaving behind echoes of a life that had never truly belonged to her, while Victor, Nick, and Nate exchanged looks that told 1,000 stories. Stories of guilt, fear, conflict, and the terrifying awareness that this revelation would ignite a chain reaction, capable of altering the balance of power not just within the Newmans but across all of Genoa City. Yet as Victoria guided Audra outside, away from the chaos, away from the whispers, away from the world that had stolen their past, she felt something she had not felt in years. Purpose, raw, unstoppable, relentless purpose. And she knew that whatever storm was coming next, whatever betrayal would be uncovered, whatever war she would have to wage, she would face it head-on as a mother reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Victoria guided Audra toward the waiting car outside society, shielding her from the flash of curious eyes peering through the windows, and as the cool evening air wrapped around them, Audra clutched Victoria's hand with a mixture of fear and newfound dependence, the emotion she had long kept buried finally cracking open under the weight of the truth. And Victoria, her heart pounding with both rage and protectiveness, brushed a strand of hair from Audra's face and whispered, "We'll figure this out together." A promise that made Audra's breath hitch because no one had ever stood with her like this before, without conditions, without agendas, without judgment. And just as they reached the car, Victoria felt her phone buzz again, this time with a message from an unknown number that read, "You found her. But you haven't found me. The game isn't over, Victoria." The chilling threat froze her in place, confirming there was still someone out there who knew exactly what happened the night her baby was taken. someone who had orchestrated everything from the shadows, someone who wasn't ready to let go of the power they had held for decades. And as Victoria stared into the darkness beyond the parking lot, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning.